Good evening, everybody. Someone nod. I see a wave and a nod, so I think you can hear me. Hi, I figure it's 6 o'clock, new time, or daylight, Pacific daylight time, right? I think that's where we're at. So I figured we'll get started. See a lot of names and faces. Let me just first ask Andrea and Sid if there's anything before I start us off from staff, or Judy, anything as chair of the board. I see. Go ahead.
I was just going to let you know, Martina just texted she's going to be a little bit late, but she's coming. And I think Alicia won't be here.
Right, yep. Well, given that, let us start. Unless anyone has anything urgent up front, let me just say our adjourn time is 7:30. So last time we were a little not sure if it was 6 to 8 or 6 to 7:30. So it is 6 to 7:30, as I think we decided last time. And let me do the, under the agenda, number one, call to order, which I guess I've done now, and the roll call. And I'll just start Dakota Boulette. Here, thumbs up. Josh Burstein, that's me, I'm here. Gary Campbell.
Here, hi.
Hey, Gary. Tom DiLiberto.
I'm here, hi.
Hey, Tom. Ann Fifield. I'm looking at not yet, okay. We'll do a second call. Alicia Hayes did email to say that she had a prior commitment. Gordon Lafer. Hey, Gordon. Judy Newman. Oh, we just heard her speak, so we know she's here. Laurel O'Rourke. Hey, Laurel, good evening. Maya Rabasa. I see you waving hand. Martina Shaber. Oh, you just said, sorry. Martina, it will be late. Erica Thesson. Hey, good to see you. Juan Carlos Vallier. Juan Carlos. I'm looking at my, not yet. And then Mary Walston. Hey, Mary. So as of right now, we are, like the boards in front of me are just moving around, or the Brady Bunch, people. Juan Carlos, there you are. I'll mark you as here. So as of right now, we have Martina not here yet, and Alicia, who we know has a prior commitment, and Ann Fifield, as of right now, is not here yet either. Okay, so that is the roll call. And
Tom is here.
Oh, sorry, where? Say that again, who is it, Laurel? Or who said something? I'm sorry, I was looking down.
Tom is here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My internet is choppy today.
Yes, I can. Tom, yeah, we have.
Tom is here.
Why do we have Tom? We have the three who we don't have yet are Ann Fifield, Alicia Hayes, who we know is a prior commitment, and Martina Shabram. Okay. So items for action at this meeting. I'll just run through the agenda very quickly. We have the approval of minutes. Then we have items raised by the audience. Number 4, there's budget committee discussion. There are 2 parts to that. One is about strengthening community engagement activities in the fall, which includes some of what we saw from ODE, and then opportunities to incorporate equity-based processes and decision-making into budget development. I also just saw Ann Fifield join us, so let's mark her as here as of 6:03. And then Roman numeral 5 would be budget committee wrap up, and then adjourning again at 7:30. So without further ado, let us on 2 sub 1 committee administration, approval of minutes from the January 24 meeting. And those were sent out last week, I want to say. Juan Carlos, I see your hand up. Say again. Is your hand not up?
No.
Oh, there's a hand on your box. So, does anyone have any thing to say or motion about the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
And who was that? I'm sorry. Was that Erica? Great. Erica made a motion to approve. Juan Carlos second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye or raise your hand or somehow signify that. All opposed. I think I see no one opposed. I'll say it's unanimous by acclamation or whatever the right Robert's Rules of Order thing is. So we approve the minutes. Next, items raised by the audience. And I believe as of a few minutes ago, we did not have anyone from the public signed up to speak. And I will turn to Carrie or
There are
Andrea.
no public speakers signed up for tonight. Thank you.
Excellent. Laurel just said to us all her Wi-Fi is not working. Maybe without the picture up, maybe you'll see us, or sometimes the bandwidth, I don't know. But we'll try to muddle through as technology is always our best friend, right? Moving on to number 4, budget committee discussion. I'm looking at the wrong page, I'm sorry. Opportunities to strengthen community engagement in the fall. We had attached the guidelines from the ODE, the state Department of Education. And Andrea, I know you'd asked us to review some pages in there, and I hope everyone's had an opportunity to do that. I think I'll turn it over to you, if you don't mind, to take us through some of this document.
You're muted.
Andrea, there's no mute sign on your name, but we can't hear you. Try. Still not.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's better.
Okay, it seems my headset decided to take a short vacation. The power's out at my house, so maybe it's in sympathy.
Good, yeah, we can hear you good. Thank you, go ahead.
Great. Okay, so basically the goal here is, of course, not to hear me talk, because you get enough of that as it is in the budget committee meetings, but to take your, have the committee discuss any questions you might have had as you read through this section of the new documentation, any thoughts that you had about previous community engagement processes and where you'd like to see us change or go in a different direction, and of course, any thoughts you had as you read through this about future engagement efforts and how those can be strengthened and basically be as effective as possible for the district. So I really want to step back and let folks talk.
And I thought maybe we could add, if there's question on some vocabulary. When I was reading through it, I was like, maybe those are just words that Andrea and I are used to using, which some of us in this room are very much in the educational realm, but there could be people who this is not their first job, and you might want to ask vocabulary questions, which I think would help the understanding of some of the points that they were making. So
in that case, I do have a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. The document is very well written. That section of community engagement has many suggestions. It's pretty well crafted in terms of, look at what you previously have done, which groups, and see how you can strengthen and then engage. That's really good. I hope we can focus a significant amount of time on reviewing how we went about doing the business before, how we engaged groups and individuals, so that we can actually build upon or really start from scratch. I hope that comes up. But one of the things that kept on coming up for me, they keep on using systemic racism, and I understand it, but I want to know how was the transition from systematic to systemic, and how, if we're going to be adopting systemic, how are we going to be using it? Because systematic is more about, taking it apart and really using some things to actually plan something as it relates to racism. So I didn't know if you have any insights of why they started using systemic versus systematic racism. So I'll be curious about it since you asked about vocabulary.
that's a really great question. I do not know when they moved from one word to the next in my memory, it's been systemic, and maybe I've just made it that word when I read it. Any ideas, Andrea? Or I know that Brooke's in the room too. And Brooke, in the past helped, well, we had a number of us, but the last time we did the SSA and going out and meeting with the community, we were one of the people, the districts that they wanted to share and have us explain how we did our presentations so that others could learn from us. Because Brooke, how many meetings did we have? Over how many?
We had over 50 contacts with groups, but I want to be clear that we went to probably over 25 organizations and churches and nonprofits. So we went out to places and connected with folks when we were doing our original SIA. We had a large amount of open houses and things that we did in cafeterias and libraries where we brought people in, but we also had small groups where we went and we met with Centro Latino. We met with small groups of people facilitated through them. I know Dr. Karis McGay, who was here before, worked with Carrie Delph on a lot of that, but we were able to go out to specific places and meet at times and locations that were beneficial to them, not have them. So we did a combination of both. And that was it's hard, and I apologize because of the 2-year gap of my time of being able to track exactly when we did that. Board member Lafer, I think you were just coming on the board at that time, because I remember being at 2 years before the pandemic started. So has it been 3.5 years? I can't remember. I just remember it was right at that transition time. So,
and please allow me to kind of share with you more why I zoom into that. Because if they're talking about the systemic racism as a systems in more of a broad global perspective, that's great, because then you're not going to keep on saying to us, oh, this is only on this area, small thing that doesn't affect other areas. Moving from the micro to macro and vice versa, that would be fantastic. But again, I think because of the work that we're going to be doing in the future, is really going to dictate whether we're going to be attacking the systems in place or the steps that are being taken. And it might be exchanging things, but I just wanted to be clear that I understand it better, because there's a huge shift from when we started to talk about this 10, 15 years ago, as far as systematic racism and institutional knowledge and so forth. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, Juan Carlos, I will also take your question to the state in the sense that we haven't had any guidance yet, except for what we've been, the 165 pages that we've been given. They will be holding some webinars and some trainings for school districts across the state this spring. So what you bring up is a good point, and we will see what we can find out and then be able to share back once we ourselves get a level of training. I apologize, level of training that we can then come back to.
Okay. I see 3 hands up, and they're kind of, I saw them all at the same time. So I'm just going to go from left to right on my screen. Tom, and then Judy, and then Gordon.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm glad Brooke ticked off a few of the things that we're doing that happened, I believe, for the SIA funds, if I'm not incorrect on that. And I'm glad that happened. And I know we've been sitting in the middle of a pandemic for a very long time, but I think that we've learned some lessons along the way. I'm sure we've learned some lessons along the way. And I'm really happy that 4J is strengthening the ways we connect with stakeholders, but we still have a long way to go, in my opinion. Last meeting, I made the point, others made the point as well, but I'll reiterate, we can't rely on the same methods or just, do a one-off. We have to, and I'm not accusing anybody of having, oh, we're not going to do that again. But as we come out of this pandemic, we need to sustain the effort of what we're doing to connect with communities, and going to our communities and not just allowing them or making it easier to come to us. It doesn't always work that way. We don't listen to the same radio stations sometimes, news sources, our work hours might be different among the different communities. Social media, texting platforms, all that stuff is all different. And also there are varying levels of internet access, but I just wanted to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, and we redouble our efforts as we move forward with these one-time funds, and every year it should be ongoing. Some of the things I do realize probably couldn't happen for next year, but we need to put things in place so this is how, so everybody knows in our communities that this is how we connect with folks and we keep these conduits open. Anyway, I think that covers most of the points I wanted to make.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Judy, and then I have Gordon after that.
Thanks, Tom. I thank you. Those are great comments. And yeah, I think the community engagement we're talking about was for one of these 6 initiatives, which is the student investment for sure. And that was at least the most robust work we have done. Not to say there's a lot more we should be doing. But I had a question in terms of the terminology and what. So first of all, I'm really happy to see this effort to pull together all 6 of these plans. I've always thought it's crazy to have 6 separate plans with all these different goals along with the strategic. So I think the idea of pulling them together in one strategic plan is excellent. But I have to admit, I was very familiar with the high school success, with the student investment account, and the career and technical education. I'm a little fuzzier on what the other ones tried to accomplish. I read the high level summary, and I wonder if it would be worth just giving a little input. Like, I don't know what Everyday Matters is about, or continuous improvement planning and early indicator. And I don't know at this stage if that's important, but I wasn't even aware of those plans.
Brooke, you want to? Oh,
I can start. Our Everyday Matters is the statewide attendance initiative. I just don't have the list. I was taking notes as you were speaking, Judy. Jeff, I know, is on here because I think one of them has to do with federal programs, but I'm not, or funneling through, but I say that again. Everyday Matters. I just don't have them all memorized.
Early indicator and intervention systems.
I'm trying to find what page they're on. I think I saw them yesterday.
Oh, page 10 of the document.
Oh, I thought I found yesterday. I thought I saw where they were actually, maybe not.
You said Everyday Matters, early indicators, and I couldn't hear your.
The third one was continuous improvement planning.
Okay, that's the one that I believe. Jeff, do you have information on that one? I just don't have it all in my brain.
I don't. I believe that several of these are newer pieces that we're piecing together, okay, and being required to do all tied together now.
So because this has all been siloed in the past, Judy, obviously there's ones that we are much more familiar with and working with. That's part of the education piece that we'll be going through this spring. So as we continue to learn more, we will be coming back and sharing also. So
Great. At some point when you have more information, it'd be good to know, because it would be good to know all the components this is supposed to encompass.
Yeah, obviously I know most familiar with high school success, SIA, you know, those ones, but I want to make sure that, like I'm sharing, there's a learning curve for all of us too, as we come back together to learn the state guidance on how they want us to proceed.
Thank you. Gordon, you're next. And if I may put myself on the queue after that, or Maya, I just saw your hand up. So Gordon, then Maya, and then I'll put myself after Maya.
Thanks, Josh. I want to comment briefly on the what we're talking about here, the planning for community input in the SIA or other things next year. And then, but also on the budget that's in front of us right now. I've said this before, in my opinion, the community input didn't really amount to anything. And it's not because we didn't do a lot, we did a ton. And whatever the numbers were that somebody said, there were an enormous amount of meetings, but it generated a gigantic word cloud in which everybody said they wanted more of anything. And then as far as I can see, district staff did what they thought made sense. And it wasn't against what the public said, but the public said they did everything. And one of the things that we talked about that I think is critical to enabling any kind of public input to be meaningful is for the district staff to come out before that process and say, here's what looks to us like the best and smartest ideas for how to spend this money if there was no public input. And then the public input can be structured saying, okay, is there something that we think is more important than these priorities that have been identified here? Because if we just say, do we want more nurses? Do we want more social workers? Do we want smaller classes? Like everybody wants everything for, you know, and for understandable reason. And even just to say, well, here's how much a nurse costs and here's how much a, I don't know, free lunches cost. How do you trade those off? You know, it doesn't end up with something meaningful. So I think if where the community input is going to be meaningful, we have to have something ahead of time to say, all right, here's what we think, here's our starting off point, and then we can have input from there. But the things I want to say about, you know, this is next year. We have this year's budget in front of us that has to be approved in May. I have asked for, I don't know if it was in here or in the last board meeting, but I've asked to hear from the district ideas for how we could pay for a pilot program of putting librarians back in a small number of Title I elementary schools in ways that would be minimally disruptive to district operations. And I would hope to hear that either now or sometime soon. That's about this budget. I also know that probably everybody on this call and everybody possibly listening I don't even know what the right words are to talk about the recent number of students who took their own lives, but I think everybody is horrified and feels like, okay, what can we do that goes beyond what we're already doing? I honestly don't know. It's not my area of expertise. There's one thing that I have heard, which is that the Child Development Center at South Eugene High School is or shortly will be down one staff person, and that we could restore funding for that. If that's true, I would certainly support that. And otherwise, I would like to hear at our next meeting proposals for how we could add additional spending for mental health supports. And I don't have a specific proposal for what those should be, but I would trust the district staff to talk to whoever has to be talked to. But in terms of things that we would look at now before in the current round of the budget that's going to be approved in May, those are two things that I would like to see separate from the working on community engagement for next year. Thank you.
Maya, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that those things that you were asking about, Judy, if you go to page 23, they have a decent summary of what they are. And what's nice about the document is that it also tells you about how they're all linked together. So like with the Everyday Matters, it explains that it's never going to be seen as a pullout because it's integrated into all 5 of the other components. But it outlines the intention, it outlines how the funds can be spent. So it starts on page 23 and it goes through to like 26, 27.
Thanks, Maya. You know, I actually did see some of that, but it was really out of context for me. So I just wanted to see what our district was doing. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
With all permission, I have myself next in the queue, and then I see Anne's hand is up, then on Carlos again. I just want to say a couple of quick things I thought of. One, the comment that I think it was Brooke who talked earlier about that we went out to the community, not just having people come to us, meaning 4J. I will say this, I saw, like, for example, on page 110 of the section that we were particularly, asked to read, the idea of location. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before when Carlos has brought this up as well, both in this forum, and he and I have speak between these meetings too, in terms of the kinds of things we're looking to talk about and that people have asked to talk about. And I think that's real important. And with all respect, Gordon, I will say and I can't remember what year it was, but I remember being out. Now, I'm not a member of Central Latino. I'm not, I'm a different demographic group, et cetera. but I did go to my kids' schools, and that was an easy one because, I knew the school, and I can't remember, and maybe Prick, if you remember, I think there was one at ATA where two of my kids were at the time, and one at North, or at least in the North District, because I had kids there. And those two schools, incidentally, are some of the higher poverty schools as well. And I found it was interesting. I thought there was a good turnout. Parents, you never see as many students as you want at these things, of course, but maybe there's other tools that we could use for that. But I thought, at least from my standpoint, being in those schools at that moment, that it was to some degree effective. What you do with the information and all that may be maybe a different question. Then, of course, pandemic hit, and we all kind of just, went from there. But I think that we don't want to lose sight of that. I think that is important. And the other piece I'd say is something I think, Gordon, you also said, that it's about this year too. So we're looking at this document from ODE. I think it's great that we're one of the districts around the state, apparently, that they thought we did good or good enough job, at least, to try to use some of what we learned, and that we absolutely need to keep doing that. But I will also say that you're right, we need to keep, we're not waiting till 2023 as this document ends to then see, okay, now we're ready, let's do. I think there's an urgency out there, and I think you're right. This is this year's budget. We have a limited amount of time, although we have a number of meetings still left based on our schedule. But seriously, we have to look at what's going on right now. And maybe we'll know more next year after, based on engagement that happens then. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that this year is important. So I appreciate, Gordon, you saying that as well. And then Juan Carlos.
Thanks, Josh. I just wanted to acknowledge that I think Gordon made a really good point. I think it's really hard to go out to the public and get input from the public and then try to apply it. You get a word cloud that says, these are our priorities. But you listen to these budget meetings, everything's a priority. We want student mental health. We want libraries. We want everything. And then you look, we have no reserve. We've spent down our reserves. And so we can't have everything we want. And so it is really hard in a public process then to say, these are our priorities. And compounded by a lot of any of the federal funds, I think there's a lot of strings attached to funds that get very complicated. And I have confidence that Andrea and Sydney know what they're doing with those. And, but it makes it hard. Like my sense is there's not a ton of wiggle room with the funds. And so it's such a challenge to try to get there, and just to acknowledge that I don't even know what to do with it. But so thank you, Gordon, for articulating it.
Juan Carlos, and then Gordon.
Thank you. I wanted to quickly call your attention to page 104, in which the suggested steps to how to get started, 3 very clear, specific steps that we can definitely implement. We have actually been implementing this in the local schools. So this is fantastic. But number 2, it says, get clear on your core engagement team. And that seems to be the one that we have to go back to, because if you're gonna go back, you're gonna start engaging the community. You have to be clear on what you expect from them, and that our input is gonna be valued, listened to, and then implemented. So careful on that one. Then on page 105, if I may, so at the beginning, the introduction talks about the SSA funds and the SIF funds that is geared to students, and it's listing specific students of color with disabilities. At the very end, talks about the families of students of these focal groups, and also talks about staff. And I hope that we carve out some time to talk about how we're going to be supporting the families of those students. And then staff, that piece, I'm not sure how it's part of it. I'm glad that it is there. I just don't know how it'll affect. And then finally, on page number 10, as Josh was alluding to, he and I have been kind of talking about and getting some ideas. But keep in mind that while we were out there, and all of your board members were out there engaged in the community. Dr. Valdera did a phenomenal job going above and beyond, going to different places of the city, different schools, garnished a lot of input from families. If you do look at that page 110, and you look at this sort of the levels of community engagement, this is fantastic. But in tying it to what Gordon said, earlier, and to what Anne also mentioned, what's missing on this is that, yes, you're trying to inform the community, you're consulting the community by asking them and all that stuff. Then you're trying to get us involved, and then perhaps hopefully collaborate. And what's missing is we're now going back to those communities to let them know what you captured, what you've heard, and most importantly, what you're doing with the info and the feedback they gave you. The impact on communities that don't usually get involved is that I spend my time away from my family, I try to support, but I've heard nothing, or my suggestions or my input is not even implemented. So keep that in mind if we're gonna be adopting this kind of suggestive charts. Remember what's missing, that was missing from the past processes.
Sorry, I said thank you. I see Gordon and Laurel's hand is up, and we'll go after that. Gordon, go ahead.
Thanks. First, Josh, I want to be clear. I totally agree. I had the same experience as you did. I think those meetings were well attended and interesting. I just don't have confidence in what they led to. And to Anne's point as well, like mostly what I don't want to do is pretend and to kind of like pretend we're soliciting input for places where it can't really be used. If we have a stream of funding that is narrow, that is targeted by whatever federal or state regulations, and it can really only be used for one thing, then we should just be clear about that. Then we shouldn't solicit input as if it could be used for other things. And if there are things that we think this is really too complicated to put out to the community, it's something that high-level staff need to figure out, then let's just say that. I just don't want to go out and say, let's give people the impression that they're going to have input over a whole lot of things. If it's not realistic, it's not realistic. Or otherwise we should go out and say, look, what we have is whatever it is. We have $10 million that is discretionary and everything else is nailed down. And so here's the things we could do with that. I also personally would like to see some meetings that are targeted around particular needs. Like if we're talking about special education, it would be useful to have a forum or whatever that is particularly invited parents of students with special needs or special ed teachers, like places where people who are engaged in a certain set of need can sit around and kind of brainstorm together. Okay, we have limited money to spend. What might be a smart way to spend that? Because my fear is that when we just say, let's invite the general public and ask about everything you'd want, for good reason, we get something that's too scattershot to be useful.
Thank you, Gordon. Laurel was next, but now I don't see her. I know she's having Wi-Fi problems. Laurel, are you there? Well, hopefully she can get back on. Any other?
She's trying to get back on. You can move forward and she'll.
Okay. Yeah. Let me. I will. If I can just say one more thing, Gordon. I appreciate. I wasn't. You're right. At those meetings, I was not at ones that were aimed at different segments of the community. I was at ones at my kids' schools because that was what I knew and easiest for me. And you're right. And this kind of piggybacks on what Juan Carlos said too, that people put a lot of stuff down, whether it becomes a word cloud or whether it becomes that staff read it all and figure out where the needs are. And on one hand, you're right. Everyone wants everything. We can't do that, right? On the other hand, and this may be moving a little bit into number two, but on the agenda, number 4, number 2, about how to increase on corporate equity-based processes. I don't want to jump too far yet until we're kind of, through this document too and all. But one thing I will say that I've seen, well, let me give you an example. I saw at that time, I had my daughter with me who was a North a student, and of course, students have different views sometimes than those of us who are older and think we're smarter and all that kind of thing. And sometimes we're right and sometimes they're right, but some of the, I've talked before in this setting for years about seeing a 9th grader at North speak. We were waiting for a legislator in Salem and speak to, there were a couple of board members who were at this meeting at the time and talked about that she's in that gap where she didn't get free, this was before free lunch for all, she didn't get free lunch, but her parents still couldn't afford it. And what do we do with people like that? And things like that. So I think there is something to be heard about students, but But anyway, what I was going to say is one thing we have talked about, I've seen before in budget committee, and people who have been on longer than I, like Mary and Alicia and others will know this too, is, sometimes you hear the squeaky wheel, whether it's librarians or whether it's the middle school mentor program or whether it's art or there was another, social emotional learning and things like that. And I think when we look at it, and I'm going to bring equity into a little bit now, even though I know maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the agenda, but here's the way I view it. Gordon, you've talked about the idea, and then I see Dakota and Gary, and if Laurel can type a question. Oh, Laurel's back. So actually I'll turn to Laurel in just a sec, and then we'll go to the others. But, Gordon, you're talking about maybe a pilot program or something. I mean, you're very in the weeds. Like we're talking about librarians, and maybe 3 schools or 5 schools or whatever. And I kind of looked at it this way, and it's just, the way I'll put it out. I think we want everything everywhere, right? That would be the best for everyone. And equality is every school has a librarian, right? And maybe we can't afford that right now. And the way I view it is equity is the schools that have the greatest need, however you measure that, whatever the metrics are, needs index or whatever it may be, start with that. And then maybe a couple of years from now, there will be money for everyone. But at that point, there'll be other things. If it's counselors in the schools right now, I want every school to have a counselor, especially with the suicide problems we're talking about. And I'm talking social, emotional, not just like college and career counseling, But so again, I'm maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but I just kind of see it that way, that if we can do this at least incrementally, focus on equity, then equality, and then we'll keep moving forward with it. Laurel, you're back. So I want to give you the floor, and then I see Dakota and then Gary.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, you kind of did a great lead in for me. So seems like this conversation is bigger than whatever the question was at the beginning, which I also missed. But right now in this moment, I think one of the biggest issues, and Gordon mentioned this and maybe others did while I was in and out with my fun Wi-Fi problems. But if we are going to facilitate a zero tolerance policy for losing children to death by suicide, we need to fund it. It needs to be the priority. It can't be, and that's where it gets pushed to the very front. And I want this to be an absolute conversation here. If we want the people in charge to be able to do what they need to do, we need to be able to give them the means to do that. And having mental health counselors in schools, when we have more than just the sadness, the overwhelming, terrible sadness of losing a young child to suicide, but also the behavioral issues, things that are going on, supporting our educators at this level. And it's not, like you said, thanks for saying it that way, because when we talk, a lot of times we'll just say counselors, but really what we need are mental health counselors in our schools, and to cut out all the barriers. Right now, the barrier, they're being suggested to go to Lane County Behavioral Health or to another provider, or they're at school between 8:30 and 3:30. And hopefully, maybe parents can get them to that. Then they have that narrow window, because I know Lane County Behavioral Health is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. So removing those barriers and giving the access and having professionals in mental health in our buildings, I want to make a focal point of what we do in our budget work this year.
Thank you, Laurel. Dakota, and then Gary.
It wasn't that long ago when I was a student in our district schools, I saw the things that are being discussed right now. I was one of those students who wasn't able to eat most days because we just couldn't afford it, but we made way too much to where we couldn't get free or reduced lunch. I believe my school had 1 mental health counselor. These are things that we need in our schools. We need to make things like universal free lunch, more mental health support. We need to make these things a priority for our district, for our schools.
Dakota, thank you. You're the closest. I'm going to guess that you're probably the person who's most recently a student here. And even those of us who have have, when did, if I may ask, when did you graduate from?
16, North Eugene High School.
What year again?
2016.
16. Okay, my daughter was 2020 there, but those of us on this call, many of us have kids or have had kids in the schools. You've lived it day in, day out. So thank you.
So I've seen with my own eyes everything that we've been talking about in our schools. I've experienced a lot of it as well. It's a concern, and that's why I applied for the committee to begin with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Call me Josh, please. Gary.
I appreciate everybody's contributions to the conversation this evening, especially as we're talking about trying to engage the community in deeper and more meaningful ways. I think, Josh, you mentioned trying to get staffing funding and addressing issues in an equitable way for schools who may need it more than other schools. I think in the past that had been an adopted practice under Dr. Balderas. I know Oscar had developed sort of a formula for figuring out where the staffing needs were when they're trying to increase the number of staffing in schools when we had additional funding to hire additional staffing. So I think an opportunity for Andrea and Sid might be in your budget presentation talking about how those decisions when you're looking at staffing for schools or increasing staffing. You might talk about, we use this staffing model that was developed around equity and seeing more need in these specific schools, and that's why we're looking at increasing the staffing for those schools. Would be able to address some of what Josh is talking about. And also what Juan had mentioned about, sort of circling back to community groups who have provided input, I think is really important because that is sort of completing the cycle of a relationship that you're having with them as you're having, in communication with them. Again, another opportunity, I think, in this budget cycle currently is to talk about, how decisions were made based on what community input had during, the previous SIA cycle. How did those conversations in the community adjust, your priorities as a district as you're looking forward at the budget? And then that would inform us. We'd be able to talk to community members. So it could help, complete that cycle of feedback to the folks who showed up to the both the in-person events as well as you going to the community groups to have those discussions. So just a couple of suggestions there.
Great, thank you, Gary. Erica.
Yeah, one of my questions is, I know the district sends out lots of surveys. I'm curious how good of engagement we have through surveys. That's one thing. So that for people that, aren't able to attend, like, do we get decent engagement from online surveys? My other thing is if, we're talking about doing engagement with different communities in person, I highly recommend the district have some sort of availability to offer food and childcare for those. I mean, I'm a single mom, and when the kids were little, I would be a lot more prone to being at things if I could feed them. So I think if we're talking about really engaging the community, we need to feed and help care for the kids so that the parents can engage. And then for the older groups, having the food there might more ensure that maybe the middle and high school kids come to also participate. So anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Erica. Maya, I see your hand up, and then I want to give a chance if Andrea or Sid or someone else, Brooke or someone wants to answer some of that. But Maya, you go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Josh. I just want us to also, before jumping into the question of community engagement, I think it's important for us to reflect and reach out to learn about our past community engagement. It's one thing to list all the different forums that we've had, and it's another to find out if those forums have been effective from a community perspective. I think it's one of those dilemmas where we put a ton of energy into putting forward a survey or whatnot, only to find folks feeling disenfranchised because they don't see themselves in the decisions that are made following filling out surveys or attending forums. And I know there was at least a a contingency of folks who felt that way about the SIA process last time. And so I just want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in that same, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of time. And for us to do it without a clear understanding of how we might do better than we have in the past feels like it won't lead to as fruitful results as we all here genuinely hope for.
Judy.
Thank you. Thanks, Maya and Gordon, all the comments. I think the difficulty with community outreach, the way we've done it, and I think there have been some suggestions, I think it was Gordon, but maybe identifying the issues we want to solve, whether to Laurel's point, it's like zero tolerance for just increasing mental health or whatever, or the issue of behavioral issues in schools, whatever it is, make it issue focused in terms of our highest priorities, and then going out and asking about input for resources or ways to actually affect those direct, those problems that we want to address in our school. Maybe it's one, but at least focuses the conversation, because it is really frustrating, because yes, people gave a lot of input and they were so far reaching and we couldn't do all those things. There was no way. And so our work would be maybe to really focus that conversation for our priority for this year. And I'm not even clear if there's any and how much there is to actually allocate this year. That would be important to know, so we can at least be realistic about what we're trying to go after. So I'm definitely feel like that's an important next step. For next year, we have a lot more work to do with pulling these budgets and things together. So,
Tom, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I would, I appreciate the comments about the focus, giving a focus to certain meetings where people know what we're going to be talking about, because you will get something that's scattershot, as Gordon laid out. But at the same time, you have to, I think you need to do both. The district doesn't know what it doesn't know. And oftentimes we go to, we hear something that's totally new. We didn't know that was as big a problem or a need, because we haven't had such a particularly smooth conduit of information back and forth with that community. So I think we need to do both. Having a gigantic word cloud is not useful. I get that. I think that we need to identify a few things that are at the top of the list. And I think what Laurel was pointing out is definitely at the top. But at the same time, we have to have our ears open all the time, and it has to be ongoing. It can't be just when we get a lump of cash. It has to be ongoing, so we can do the best job we can do all the time. And yeah, I think that sums up what I wanted to say.
If I could just jump on the last thing that Tom just said, and others have mentioned it before too, about the one-time cash versus the ongoing. And I don't know even if superintendent and all staff and even board members here know for sure. I know the legislature just ended, but it may be helpful for us as a committee to have an understanding, and I don't know the easiest way to put this together, but of what when you present to us kind of, here's what we see as a budget, and you're incorporating the things you're hearing people talk about that as educational experts are needed, and obviously the things we're hearing about with mental health supports and equity and things of that nature and nutrition. But how much of what you have or what we have this year, because we're like Gordon said at the beginning, we're looking at this year right now, how much of what we have is ongoing versus is one time? And the other piece of it, and someone else had mentioned this, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, but that if this money, and maybe it was Ann, that there's money directed towards one particular thing that you can use only for that thing. I have a colleague who talks about, well, that's green money, great, we could use it for this, but the blue money can only be used for this other thing. And so obviously, to increase ways that we can make sure that that money is well spent, even if it's one-time funding. But that's another piece I think this committee might want to see, just kind of, knowing this year, and you do have the chart that shows the next few years. So I think that's great, but just an understanding about this year, what are we, what's one-time money running out and versus that can continue. Just a time check, it's about 6:50. We are a little bit ahead of time because we did not have public comment. But I think we're in a good place. Let's keep talking. I think I want to do a quick check. Andrea, I'll just turn to you if there's, I think we had planned for this particular part of discussion about the community engagement to go from 6:30 to 7. We started it probably 20 minutes early, and there's no reason we can't continue it or combine it with the next part, which is about equity-based processes and decision-making, which I think we've also kind of talked a little bit about already. Go ahead, Andrea. Is there more about this particular document or ODE that we should know?
No, I think definitely you could, any of those options, any of the above works as a good answer. Just to also let folks know that we have also set aside time for this topic at the next budget committee meeting. So this is not the only opportunity that the budget committee will have to talk about either of these topics. I just didn't want people to think that this was the one and done. And if we need to continue this conversation, we can continue to do that on the 28th. If we have areas that you really need an answer on something so that you can continue down your path and have a constructive conversation, we can definitely do that for, targeted for the next meeting. Just wanted folks to know that that's available. You don't have to listen to me talk for an hour and a half next time.
So we're kind of in an open forum type situation, I think, now to talk about any and all of the above. And I will take advantage of the fact that I see no hands up right now. And since being chair, I guess, to say one thing. Oh, and Andrea, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I think
Laurel has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're in the corner there. Yes, go ahead, Laurel.
Yeah, so I'm a bit confused about what we're doing right now. It seems like we're just having a conversation, which we could do over coffee somewhere. But really, what's our goal? What is the outcome of this? Is this conversation with this topic, with all the information that was provided to us, the hundreds of pages, is that something that we need to decide for this budget, Andrea?
No, we do not. This is a that conversation is forward looking to inform what you would like to see when we go out for community engagement in the fall. This really helps us as we're learning more about what is not only expected, but what we could do to make the process as effective as possible here at 4J. Hearing from you all of those pieces that we talked about, what did you like or didn't work quite as well as you would have liked in the past processes. What would you like to see in the future? This is all helping us as we move towards a new process.
Okay, that's helpful to know, because there are things that I would like to know what can be addressed for this budget. And are there funds? Of two things that I want is, one thing is, how can we fund at least for our high school level mental health counselors in all of our high schools? Can we, and my other was a base wage increase for all of our employees, and to be a leader in this in our community, to say we're not going to pay anybody under a certain amount, which I hope is $18. So those are my two things that I would love to know if are possible for this year in this budget. I think, yes, the conversation and how to engage is a lovely conversation, but also we are losing children right now. And I just saw a letter from educators talking about horrific things that are happening in their classroom as far as behavioral. So there's things that need to happen now, and if possible, and if it's something we can look at in this budget committee, and Andrea, if you have the ability to show us where the funds are and what can be moved, and even if it's one-time funds, I'm fine with that. I know it's great to think about the huge big picture and what we can do forever, but also we have nothing that is working in place right now to save these children. So let's get something in place that can work, and that takes money.
Most definitely. And oh, I was just gonna say, we will be talking about some of those as we talked at the one-time funds and where those are right now when we go to our March 28th meeting. So that's where we talk about grant funds, which includes our one-time ESSER funds, the Elementary and Secondary Education Emergency Relief Funds. Those are our largest one-time funds. So we'll continue the conversation there at the next meeting.
I now see 6 hands up, which is great, all of whom have spoken before. So I want to take 1 minute. If there's anyone else who has not yet spoken, who wants to say something, otherwise I will start. And the order that I see on my screen at least is Gordon, then Juan Carlos, then Erica, then Gary, then Tom, then Maya. And I'm going to write that down so I can remember that. Go ahead, Gordon.
All I remember is I was first. I know that this conversation is just about the, this community engagement for next year, but we do, the budget that's coming up in May, the board has to approve, and the budget committee is supposed to be advisory to the board. And so if we can, I don't know, Andrew, if it's in the March 28th meeting or by when this is doable, but I think from my point of view, the things that we're talking about, more mental health supports or more, or the librarians things, or maybe some other things, we're not capable of saying, oh, I'm going to go through the 500-page budget and say, here's where I want to take $300,000 from, right? And so, if it's possible, that's why what I would like to know is if we want to fund those things, where are the places we could take money from that would be least disruptive? And if the answer is, you know what, there's no place to take money from except not having free meals, then that's the answer. I would hope that that's not the answer, but for it to be useful for us, I feel like, or for us to be useful at the task of trying to say any priorities, we have to be able to say, these are the things we want to do. We don't want to destroy everything to do it. And is there a way to do it that is not destructive of key functions of the district? And in a way we can only do that if there are like some options or ideas that come from district staff, whether it's your office or someplace else. So I'd hope we could do that, whether it's March 28th or whenever is doable after that.
Juan Carlos, I have you next.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. It's really helping me quite a bit and learning quite a bit every day. So, or every time that I'm here. Meaningful, respectful feedback that includes sometimes loving, constructive criticism back to the district. We can learn a tremendous deal from, especially in the last cycles. So this is why I keep on emphasizing going back to the groups, going back to the people that we ask for feedback, to let them know what we've heard and what we're doing with the info. Otherwise, we feel like we're not being heard, or our input has less value because we saw other feedback being established. And that takes more digging into why, but because the info is lacking back to the groups, then that's how it's left, that we are not valued. Look, if we are gonna be discussing how to fund specific items, I think we can do all, but we also have to be cognizant of where we're gonna be taking money from. You probably got a copy of my last email to the superintendent about what is the effect and what areas we can take money from and supplement. But it seems to me that on a given week, I directly hear from teachers. This happens to be teachers of color, but I hear from them about behavior issues in the classroom and how it can be really tied to mental health counselors. So Laurel bringing up that very important issue about that kind of support that's needed now. If we're gonna be doing something, that will be one place to start, because the teachers need additional tools. We have taken away many tools that teachers used to have in the classroom. And we used to also involve the parents. And now it seems to me that even when giving feedback to the, when there's a behavior issue, is being sugar-coated. And therefore the actual issue not being addressed. It could be addressed much better by having mental health counselors at each school that hopefully understand DEI as well. But at the same time, I want us to make sure that specifically on mental health counselors, that we do not convert this only as a Band-Aid, because that specific need is ongoing, unfortunately. So let us not just say one time, because I think the district's done many, many times a one-time thing, but this specific issue needs an ongoing support. So if you are going to go that route, we're going to have that conversation. Great, I welcome it. But let us think about how we're going to fund it long term, not just 1 year, please.
Next I have on my list, Erica.
And I apologize in advance for a dog barking in the back. I really want to thank everybody that's brought up the mental health issues. I mean, those that know us know that mental health struggles directly affects my kids and everybody. There's so much the past couple of weeks, but I would really like to see, like Gordon's question is my question, can this group of people here, are we capable of making a change in this upcoming budget to have more mental health services? Like Hoots is an amazing service, but Hoots is just during school hours. Inevitably, a lot of times these kids are having crisis that needs more than a text line, and it's at midnight, so who can we partner with? But we have got to get more mental health services. I know my kids have utilized the counseling service over at the Churchill Health Center. It's great. There's a couple-week waiting list, but they're only half-hour sessions, which on one hand, it's better than nothing. But at the same time, like these kids barely get out of class, decompress, they talk for 5 minutes and they got to go back to class, and we need more counselors. So that's my question. Are we capable, this is what's on fire right now. Like this is one of the buildings on fire. What are we able to, recommend some changes in the budget so that can happen?
Great, thank you. I see a couple more hands, including Mary, who has not spoken yet. So with your permission, I'd like to turn to Mary first and then circle back to Gary, Maya, and then Tom.
You can let the people that were ahead of me go ahead. It's fine.
Okay, Gary, Maya, then Mary, then Tom.
Thanks. So in our January meeting, we had talked about really not feeling like we had enough meetings on the schedule to talk about this year's budget. And I feel like we had a sense that we wanted to take some time to do some prioritization during our time together. And I feel like both the previous meeting and this meeting's time could be potentially have been better used in doing some sort of exercise where we're collectively doing some prioritization. I'd made that suggestion after our last meeting to add that as an agenda item to this meeting. I'm hearing that other people also would like to have an opportunity to create some priorities for the district prior to them bringing their budget to us, because I heard also in the January meeting from Sid and Andrea that you would like some ideas from us as you're creating the budget document, budget presentation for us. So I appreciate everybody's time, and I know that everybody's very busy, and so definitely take anything I say with a grain of salt. But feel like we have sort of lost some of our time. I'd like to get us back to, like Laurel had mentioned, sort of giving us back to this year and making sure that we're able to influence some decisions that can actually get us where we need to be sooner than later. So that's sort of, I guess, just a bit of a critique. I'd also had mentioned, I think in the January meeting, sort of wanted to have sort of a framework from the district for the budget committee to understand how all these puzzle pieces of the budget sort of fit together. I know that's going to be part of the presentation, but again, I think that if we had had that earlier within these meeting cycle, we'd be able to have a better informed conversation as we're talking about these things. That way we can see what is one time, what is going to be an ongoing budget item, because that could obviously help us with priorities as well. So yeah, that would be also something that would be still useful in the future to have, you know, some sort of document that gives us an idea of the overall framework for us to be able to have informed decision making going forward. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Maya.
Gosh, can I just say what Gary said? Gary, you just nailed it for me. I feel like we really need to devote time to talking about these priorities. And I also want us to be able to hear how we can tackle this specific issue of mental health right now, not for next year, but right now. You know, we just heard the analogy of the house being on fire. And if we look at what we're going to be doing next year, the house is going to continue to burn and we're going to be handing out glasses of water. And it's not going to be enough. And I think that we need to be able to give our leadership the resources that they need to make the moves that we all are clamoring for here. I think that when we talk about the list of priorities, we've identified one tonight. I don't think there's anybody here who would not agree with the call for more mental health support, whether it's in the form of social workers, counselors, whatever it ends up looking like. It needs to happen not in October or down the line. It needs to happen like next week. So it even feels like waiting until March 28th gives me this sense of panic inside of me. That's a lot of days. And we've seen what's happened in a 2-week spread of time in our community. So I really want us to talk about priorities, but I also want the priorities to be able to be separated into 2 categories: what we can do next year and what we can affect like today.
Mary.
Thank you. And I feel like I'm a broken record sometimes, and I'm not trying to minimize the awful news of the last couple of weeks with regard to students and their mental health. But I think before we start trying to build new programs, we should learn a little bit about what the district has in place this year and what we have existing now in our schools. And the superintendent and her staff, to their credit, have worked a lot on this year. And I don't know whether it's the pandemic, whether it's just where we are as human beings, but there's a lot of despair in the world. And I don't think you can blame it all on the lack of counselors in high schools. I just think that we're in a particular place where understanding what we have right now, what we've done in the schools will be really helpful. And, you know, schools just aren't in a position to provide the type of professional support that some of these students needs. And, you know, Lane County Mental Health can't accommodate all of them. So we have a much larger problem here rather than just not having counselors in schools. And I would point out that we do have counselors in school. I'm not saying it's enough, but I think the district has really done a good job in the last couple of years aiming towards that goal. So that's where I would like us to look too, is like, what do we have? What do we need to improve rather than trying to rebuild, you know, a system out there, but what needs to work, what doesn't work. If it's hours that aren't working, then let's figure out how to get more hours of, you know, but we can't send people off to become psychologists. It's a larger community issue. So I would just caution us before we, you know, go running down the field with the ball to look at what we have right now and how can we improve upon that. Thank you.
Judy.
Well, a lot of what I was going to say was said, but the thing I want to add is I really appreciate, Erica, your comments that were very specific about the appointments being at Churchill, but being short. And so I think where I'm going is, where are those gaps that would make a difference? Are they a 24-hour service? Another email we got was, you know, it's hard to find counselors. Do we need people that will meet face-to-face with kids? And so to really be to know what we have, but where those gaps that would make a difference are, because we don't have unlimited resources or unlimited workforce. But I think it's important to see where we aren't, where, you know, our kids calling after hours. Is that really the time that's needed? And that's the information I think that would help me make targeted decisions. So.
Great. Thank you. I see Gordon and then Maya.
Thanks, Josh. You know, and just in talking about this issue of mental health supports, I want to say two things. One is this has nothing to do with anybody taking blame. I don't think this has anything to do with evaluating was something done right or wrong. I don't think there's any question that, I don't think anybody in this call feels more horrified than anybody else about what we've been, you know, what we've seen with kids in our community. So it's the saying we need to do more is not saying that anybody has been deficient or done anything wrong. It's just we're seeing the scale of this crisis, and I think everybody feels the same thing. And what seems to me is that, and I don't presume to answer the kind of questions that you posed, Judy. I don't know what the right places are, but I also think that we have to act quickly. And we, you know, if we say, I'm not saying that anybody's saying this, but if we said, well, let's take 2 years and have a study to figure out exactly what we want to do, obviously we don't want to do that because we have a crisis in front of us. And I feel like we need to, as quickly as possible, put together the best minds in district leadership, in the educators who are close to the ground working with these kids, and some parents, and come up with the best we can that we can spend money on. And as a board member, honestly, I would be happy to defer to a group like that comes to us and says, look, we've thought about it. This is the best thing we've come up with. We can't guarantee you it's going to work, but this is the best thing we have and we want to spend some money on it. Great. I'm not going to second guess that. And people might be wrong, but there's an urgency to act. And I think we should take it completely out of anything political or about blame or positions or anything like that.
Maya, you're next, and I'd like to put myself after you.
I want to second what Mary was just saying about we need to understand what we have in place now before we make calls for, you know, new things, because sometimes the calls for new things are because we don't know that they're in place. Like Erica described something at Churchill that I would like to know more about, and I would like to know if we can get more of it. I also appreciate the point that you said, Mary, about the big effort we've made to put more counselors in school, and you're absolutely right. We added so many counselors, in particular in our elementary school setting, which is amazing. I've had my own kid benefit from that. However, the elementary school setting, what it has to its credit in terms of the counselors added that is not the same at middle and high school, is those counselors are 100% dedicated to mental health support. They're not worried about, do you have the credits? Did you get your PE credit? Have you gotten your math credit up to the right level? Are you going to graduate on time? And so they have that they're overtasked. I hear them talking about like, oh, by 9 a.m. I've done 15,000 steps already because they're running through the buildings. So we don't have enough, but we certainly made huge strides there. And what we're seeing in the elementary schools is, I think, what we need and what I'm hearing folks clamoring for at the high school level. And so I think that if we all agree that this is a priority, it would benefit us as a budget committee to understand, you know, to do an inventory, to think about it in terms of numbers, an inventory of what we have in place, what we have in place that feels like it's working best, and how it could be improved, but just like a systematic understanding of what we do have would be imperative before we attempt to rebuild if we don't understand what it is that we're rebuilding.
Thank you, Maya. I want to agree with Mary and Maya on that. Of course, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? If we and I do remember a few years ago, and I cannot remember with this pandemic, well, it was Dr. Balderas, and it was in person. So it was definitely before the pandemic. I remember being talking that year specifically about, and it was on the elementary school level. Thank you, Maya, for that reminder. That's where we had seen some behavioral issues more. And the idea was to bring in more staff who were able to deal with the social emotional learning. And then was either the year before or the year after was when we did add teacher librarians, at least at some level. And I guess I'm going to kind of take that and go back to what Gary said before and Laurel said before that is, I kind of, maybe I'm trying to look at it positively. I think we're in an open forum where we've brought up a lot of things. Mental health has been the biggest thing I think tonight that we've been talked about, that we have talked about, excuse me. But we've also talked about things like the question of free lunch for all, or free breakfast and lunch for all. That's come up a little bit tonight. We have talked about other needs, whether it's in the classroom or other supports that are there. So I think that we can do and should, and we can add it certainly to the agenda as a more open forum, if you want to call it that, or however we, we've talked about librarians a little bit tonight and last time too. So, I think part of what we can do is within certain structures, of course, talk about the areas that do concern us as a committee and advisory to the board. I don't know how much we can talk about dollars in the sense that if there's dollars in the sense of wages and salary, because I know that's bargained for, and I know there's certain things related to that. But and learn more about that as well. I see Laurel, I'll probably ask you to say you're nodding your head or shaking your head, so I want to ask you to comment in a minute, maybe. But I think we can, and have been talking about things that are important to us. We all represent the public in a different way, whether we're elected or appointed. And of course, again, and we've all said this before, we're the people who are here tonight on Monday night who have the time and energy and internet capability and all that stuff to be here. But let's not forget who's not here. And I know I said that last time, and I think we'll all keep saying it again. But I think we do have that ability to kind of bring up more of, what we're looking for. And I mean, obviously mental health has been the big thing tonight, but I think there's other things that I just tried to summarize a little bit just now. I see Juan Carlos's hand, and then anyone else? Andrea, go ahead if you don't mind. We haven't heard from you for a bit.
Oh, I didn't want to stand in front of Juan Carlos, but what I was going to say is the budget committee does have the ability to ask questions, and that's one of the most powerful, abilities of the budget committee, because you can ask a question and get an answer. And I think what I'm hearing in these conversations is that there's some questions out there, and you would like some of the answers that you've asked for at our next budget committee meeting. For example, you may want to have folks come who are the experts and talk about what we are doing about mental health, social emotional learning, other supports for our students. So you can understand, as you said, where those gaps might be. We can come and talk about, all of these topics and give you the additional information that you're needing to continue your analysis from the folks that actually are in the field day to day. Because yes, I can describe some of this, but it's better to hear from the folks that are actually responsible for these areas and how they are working within the system and where they see the growth as well as the opportunity. So we will, focus on making sure that's built into what we bring back to you.
Excellent. Juan Carlos.
Yeah, I'm glad that Andrea went first. I took the words right out of my mouth. I think there isn't many topics in which a lot of people have the same thing on their minds, and there's that interest and energy. This is one of them. I think that we have to keep on, thinking about how we're going to be guiding staff to ask those questions, to ask for information back. So I don't want us to leave today without giving the specific guidance or ask the specific questions, like, for example, you already mentioned that bringing back some info about the programs. I'm interested in knowing how many mental health counselors we have in the district. Kind of like what Maya was saying earlier, what's the state of the mental health counselors here? And most importantly, what will it take to bring extra and a few more mental health counselors, from which fund they can be taken from? So kind of bring back some options, and then of course have the committee discuss or prioritize or whatever, to obviously then forward it to the board. Now, keep in mind, the great thing about the board is that they have not only the power, but also have the final say. So again, if before we leave today, we can ask staff to come back with that info. That way we know that we were productive today, at least in this segment of the agenda.
Thank you. I see Tom, then Ann, then Laurel, then Sydney. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. The other question, I do want to ask questions. I do want to ask questions of the people who make the decisions in our district about mental health and what resources we can add, what we tap into now, what we're doing. But I don't want to spend, I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time looking at everything we do. We need to take an inventory, but we also have limited time. The question I would ask is not just what do we have right now, is I would like the experts to answer the question of what are the areas you'd improve? If you had this many more dollars, if, how much more would it take for you to do that next step? What's missing? Those are the questions I really want answered, because those are the people who are dealing with the budget that we have right now. And I'd like to have them answer, like, if we had this much more money, we'd be able to offer this. It might be a tense situation for someone to answer those questions on staff, but those are the answers that I'm most interested in. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Anne, then Laurel, then Sydney. Anne, go ahead.
I think I just have a question. I want clarification of process here. Andrea just spoke and said that one of the powers that this committee has is we can ask questions. But as I sit here and listen to folks, I hear over and over a desire to make changes to current expenditures, but it's not clear to me how the budget committee goes about doing that. Like, what is the actual procedure to make that happen? And is it the role of the budget committee to identify specific desired programs and specific changes to programmatic expenditures? And it's really just like a process question that I think staff is going to be best able to answer.
Let's go to Laurel next, and then Sydney, and maybe Sydney might be able to answer some of that as well. And then and I see Gordon too, and then let's keep an eye on the time. But Laurel, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, what I understand about the budget committee is you inform the board of recommendations for the budget. In the past, it's been kind of a few meetings, and the district says basically what they'd like to happen, and everybody says yes, is my assumption from what I've seen so far. What is happening this year is we're asking for things that are not being addressed to be addressed. And one way to do that is with budget, because things cost money. The reason my hand was raised is because I've got too many things in my head, obviously. You know what? Can Sydney go first? Because I lost my thought, and I just would like a chance to get it back.
For sure, we'll come right back to you. Go ahead, Sydney.
Okay, so I thought I've taken some notes, and I was going to try to answer some questions that have come up, and they're all really good questions. I think this group is onto something, and working together, we can figure out at least what this group thinks is the most important thing to move forward. Most of our budget is people, and what we know is that the people that we have right now are the people we'll have next year, because most of them are union, and we would have had to do due process. We would have had to let them know that we weren't going to continue their contracts, that sort of thing. So if we're planning to make big change, it would be for the next year. And so that's what and I know not all of you maybe felt the importance, I don't know if that's the right word, but of us hearing how we should go out and get feedback. But but I heard a couple of things that were really important. Juan Carlos saying that we need to go back out and say, okay, this is what we decided on, and that your vote mattered. And it might not be in here, but we heard you, and now we're letting you know how we're spending the money. Because I think what we did is we said it in a board meeting, and we may not have gone back out. So I really appreciate the comments, and I took a lot of notes. So those are good. We also, if you were to ask me, mental health is important, and we've been thinking about ahead of time, how can we help middle school counselors and high school counselors have more time for mental health, and not necessarily the things that are on a list that maybe someone else could do. And one of those is 504s. Like we could hire people who are not counselors that could work on not the whole thing, but get it prepared, put it a bow around it and say, here you go, now you can take this and work on the 504 with the student. We have not moved forward with that, but we were trying to problem solve because we can't hire enough counselors. Dr. Balderas and I worked with colleges trying to get more kids, most of them were adults, but more people into programs at our local colleges. So we would have counselors in our schools. And many of you know that we didn't used to have counselors at elementary. Now we have a counselor in every elementary. So the part of the issue is we can't hire people. We've had mental health therapists. We've been advertising for them all year, and we've not filled the list yet. So it's still open and people could still apply. But so we were trying to think outside the box. If we can't get what we think we need, how can we rearrange the checkerboard so that we can at least we might have to play a different game, but at least we get in there and we make a difference. So great questions today. And we would be making big plans for the next year. So going out, getting feedback from our constituents and figuring out pieces that are important to them. I can remember being at North when Josh was there, hearing that CTE, we want CTE programs that create high-paying jobs for our kids. And I heard that probably, 10 times, and it hit the bubble. What do you call it? A bubble, thought bubble? I don't know. Anyway, so I remember seeing it on there, but it made us, think about which CTE programs don't put kids out into after graduation into the community and with the ability to earn a high wage. So I think that our community is brilliant as well, and that we do need to hear them. I don't know if that answered every question, but that it gave you, I guess, we can do a little change now and big change next year, just because of how due process works with our staffs who are already hired.
Laurel, let's go back to you then.
Right. So one of the questions I had are, I want a very clear answer to the monies that are available this year and what can we spend them on. I know most things we would be deciding the budget is all for next year, but what can happen now? And this may be some things we just take to the board meeting to work on. Also, I mean, some of the way that you explained that, Sydney, some of it didn't sound exactly right, because I'm listening to it and I'm about mental health counselors. And if we allow more funds, then people will come. I mean, that's the difference. You pay more, you get people. If we're only paying enough to get students right out of the U of O, then that's a huge issue, because we need some really seasoned counselors to work on a huge program. What we have right now, everybody said, several people said, we got to stop and look and just see what we have. It's not working. We are losing students. Students are dying. they're at our schools for 7 hours every day. If there's something that could happen within that time, and if we can reduce the barriers, and that's my other question, what do we have in place with the least amount of barriers to get students to help? Not, hey, we'll help your parents figure out insurance and something and steps, and maybe that'll work, or maybe it won't. What do we have in place right now that, like what I didn't know about at Churchill as well, Erica? What do we have that students have someone to talk to? That didn't exist at South, and I'm not sure it does now because I've not heard about it, and I don't think my son has ever had access to that. And so I'm just, you can tell I'm emotional about this because I absolutely feel that this is something we can address, we can decide. This is zero tolerance for this and do something about it. And I think if we just look at it like, well, yeah, that'd be nice, instead of, no, I won't accept it anymore, then we're changing the way, what the focus and how we're looking at this. Because other things, I want librarians, I want all these other things, those aren't lives. There's a huge difference. You can't just, let's throw money at this and let's talk about this, let's mix it up and look at some dollars. I want to know where the dollars are that we can put and give to Sydney to hire people to get in our school to make a difference with these students, and not only kids that are coming, I know they're not kids like you said, but coming out of the U of O. I want people that will come here, and we could be a leader in this work by integrating this fully into our district, and having the budget committee say, this is what we recommend because we think we can help stop what is happening. I know it will never be a perfect system. What we have in place right now in Eugene, and I don't think a lot of you understand, there are very little mental health supports, very few. I can hear my mom talking. Very few mental health supports in our area for people 18 and under. There are very few. So if they get to the height of suicidal ideation and wanting to hurt and harm themselves, a lot of what I have seen and read that we have in place will send them to Peace Health program for kids is traumatic, and it's not trauma informed. It will keep them alive in that moment, but I can assure you, because I have had a son who had to go through this, they will never go back to this. They will never go back. And the one more thing I wanted to say, I know I'm talking a little bit long and I'm sorry, is that if a kid will not go to a counselor that at any time was the person that told them, hey, you're failing, you need to do better. They can't be the same people. They can't be the same people because they just won't access. We know kids, they won't access it. They'll be like, you're the enemy, goodbye. So I just want to add that to that. Something you had said, Sydney, about having the people at the school kind of change the roles. They'd have to change schools and everything because it won't work. You know, they just won't see them. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Important stuff. And do a quick time check. I know we're 2 minutes over, and I want to try to be respectful of time. I do see 2 more hands up, and what I think I want to do, if that's okay with everyone, is just let those 2 people have their say, maybe quickly, Gordon and Erica. And I just want to add one more thing, if I may, right now, which is it sounds like at least that we would like time on the next agenda to have a more, kind of an open discussion about some of the areas, asking the questions like Andrea said, but some of the areas that particular we have concerns about. Gordon, and then Erica.
Thank you. Just briefly, first on the process, I think the process is that the budget committee exists to have a bunch of people from the community who weigh in on priorities for how we should spend money. So the budget committee can vote a resolution to make a recommendation. It doesn't have any decision, it's just advisory to the board. We can say, here's what we recommend, and that carries some moral weight, and the board either does it or doesn't do it. But I think that's the process. And on the thing that we were just discussing about the suicide and mental health crisis, I don't know if this is what it was intended, but I don't think it's true or right to characterize this as if we can't do anything significant until union contracts are done and we can fire more people who are current union employees. I think that we have to look at and I don't believe that there's nothing, and I can't believe that there's not more that we can do now. And this is not to take away from all of the good things that are happening and all of the work and effort and absolutely straight intention that has gone into doing that. But we've discovered that we need more. And so I think it can't be that every single dollar is being spent exactly correctly and there's nothing discretionary left that we could do something more for mental health, that there's no, forget about the union, that there's nothing we would take away in administration. There's nothing we would take away in capital spending. And I've said before, I would also support using ESSER money for this, even if we only have people there for 2 years. If we do some of this, and I don't know that it's more counselors, but it's more something, even if we can only do it for 2 years to get through this immediate crisis. And I would also like to look at some things that add to the stress. I mean, we've mentioned this before. I know that a couple of years ago in middle school, we cut the passing time between classes from 6 minutes to 4 minutes in order to be able to say that we have, 200 more instructional minutes in the year, which just ratchets up the pressure on everybody and takes away the time that a kid might be able to have a conversation with a teacher staying late in class or coming early to class. There's some things like that that we could do that don't cost money and that affect, do something to the conditions that are helping contribute to that. So I would really like to hear from central district staff, from the staff who work on this, from whoever are the best minds about what can we do and where are some places in our budget for this year that we would say, this is a good thing, it's an important thing, it's something we want to do, but it's less important than putting some more needed resources into addressing the mental health crisis. Thanks.
Erica, go ahead. Our last comment, I think, on this meeting.
Yeah, I was going to say, so the program that my kids have used, so over at the health center, so we have one at North and we have one at Churchill, Lane County Mental Health and Peace Health partner with the health centers to provide nurse practitioners and to provide counselors. And so the counselors are through Lane County Mental Health that does the counseling at the health center. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I know we work with Hoots, which is a portion of Cahoots, but it's just for the teens. But unfortunately, it's only during school hours. And I think Cahoots and most people will tell you that these kids have crisis in the evenings and late at night. And often parents are not even awake when the kid is having the crisis. But one of the things, to just mention to Sid and what you were saying, Sydney, how can we go about this other ways, like in the high school setting, there's a health requirement. You have to take a health class. Are there ways that we can look at bringing in people during these health classes to connect with kids, to talk to them about resources? They're already in these health classes. It's already mandated. Taking some time right now to possibly get, people into these health classes to try to connect with students and talk about resources and things. I think there's things that we can do right now, but I did want to clarify what the counseling is. It's through Lane County Mental Health and Peace Health at the health centers.
Great, thank you, Erica. I think with that, I know we've run 7 minutes over, but I think it was an important discussion. So I appreciate all of us staying here. We have our next meeting, March 28, I believe. I see nods, and like I said a few minutes ago, it sounds like part of the agenda we would definitely want to have sort of an, I call it open forum, maybe there's a better term to use, but like what Gary was saying before, and what Andrew was saying about asking questions, if there's certain areas that we are most concerned about, like, for example, the mental health and other things that have been mentioned before, that we can sort of bring that forward. And I would also ask staff, to the extent that you've heard some of this already, mental health, you've heard librarians, you've heard nutrition, and if there's other things that you and your expertise know are important, either transportation or whatever else it may be, to kind of have at least an idea of some of that, because that's some of where obviously our areas of interest are going. With that all said, I want to thank everyone for spending the time and having a real good discussion, and I will call us adjourned, 7:38. Thank you all.